Hey guys, welcome to Darshan Talks or a KLF Deep Dive. I'm here with the famous Craig Lipset. And for those people who don't know, Craig Lipset is so famous. Well, this is where you go. How famous is he?
How
And
famous is he, Darshan?
Craig is so famous that when people want to advertise, they start with his name and then put the brand name behind him. So it's Craig Lipset for Nike, and not Nike having Craig Lipset. I got to work on that one. Not the greatest thing in the world, but my point is, Craig's very, very famous. So
I think it's
Craig,
kind of funny that you said of all the brands out there that would call Craig for an endorsement, of which there are exactly zero. The one you chose is Nike, which
Nike sounds like a good brand.
it sounds like a good brand.
Has nothing to do with
I,
Craig though.
I don't know.
Are you not
I
a
guess
runner?
I'm not a runner. I'm a hockey watcher. Uh,
There should be prizes. I think the Philadelphia fans would win so much if we were just awarded prizes for being passionate. So, hockey watchers, you could be up there.
I will say, so we live in New Jersey, and we're raising Bruins fans, Red Sox fans, all Boston sports fans in our house. And when there was, we were living here, and the kids were young, and we're like, oh, let's take them to like a more local Bruins game. It's hard to throw them in the car and drive up to Boston. And my wife saw that the Bruins were playing in Philly, and I'm like, oh no. I'm not. I'm not taking little Bruins fans to Philly for an away game. I'm like, I'll take him to the Islanders. I'll take him to the Devils. It's docile there. Uh, Rangers, maybe, but Philly, no way. But I will
Wow.
give you props for Gritty, best mascot in all of sports.
See, here's the problem. I know nothing about sports. So it's terrible that I am actually talking about sports at all. My my closest thing to sports was I was a fighter, but that's been a long time. I still teach a little bit, but yeah, I am not a sports fanatic. The fact that you are a Bruins fan, I imagine that I should be upset because Philly Bruins, I don't know if there's a thing between the Flyers and the Bruins.
It's just Philly versus the world. It's when it comes to sports. But Darshan, I'm colorblind. What color belt are you wearing? If
Well,
I
I'm
may
I'm
ask.
black in the so I was a national level fighter. I was US number 2, India number 3 in judo. From so did that a fair bit. But before we continue, why don't we first introduce you, Craig? So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I am just a clinical trials guy, like so many in our community, and like many in this community of clinical research uh, in the workforce. I've straddled time across research sites, CROs, tech companies, pharma, and biotech, and so I've held roles that have spanned from Parexel to Pfizer, from little young biotech at Nexus Therapeutics that was acquired by Bristol Myers, as well as helping to start the clinical trial tech company that became Perceptive Informatics. And my research career, like so many, started in academic research centers, places like Columbia Presbyterian in New York, or the VA hospital up in Syracuse. And so, I like to think I've been a bit of a traveler around this space. But now I work independently and have this opportunity today to help advise a number of organizations and to help chair and lead a few others.
And Craig, just so we can put that pitch out there, this is the season for giving. So what organizations do you support right now?
So for me, I'm very active with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. It happens to be thank you very much, a rare disease patient community that is personal for me as a patient with a person with sarcoidosis myself. I've been on the board there for 14 years on the advisory board. And, like so many rare disease patient organizations, it's been remarkable to see the evolution in leading and owning a research agenda that I've seen with FSR. This is, like so many others in this space, When I joined, they raised money and they handed it off to academic researchers to go do the research that they thought was important. And today, this is an organization that still closely partners with academic groups, but they own a research agenda. They own they take responsibility for filling the gaps that have prevented industry from being able to properly pursue new therapies in this area, and it's worked. We've seen biotech and pharma companies with phase 1, phase 2 studies in sarcoidosis, which we'd never seen before. And it's because, like so many other patient groups, they address the missing links in the foundation for research, endpoint clarity, site networks, patient registries, regulatory engagement for clarity, all of these missing pieces, biomarker development and strategies, right? So all these things that make it a little less risky for pharma to come in and engage. And one other quick shout out for FSR, they are the ones that reached out to the Department of Labor and got the clarification that the Family Medical and Leave Act, the FMLA, applies for those in clinical research studies. And so for loved ones who have a family member participating in a clinical trial or they themselves, there is some work protection for them through the FMLA, and FSR had gotten that clarified just last year. It's a great headline. We had a stat piece covering it just a couple of weeks ago.
I think there's some great pieces in there, and I think maybe we start by talking about 2025. Well, 2025, we're winding down the year, and one of the key portions we could start from, we could talk about, is the rise of patient centricity. But we've been talking about this rise for, I want to say, the last 10 years. I'd argue the last 30 years. So the question is, why is the rise happening, but we're not getting sort of the traction we wanted? I just putting my own pitch out there. I represent I'm board of the Emily Whitehead Foundation, and we support rare diseases as well, and using cutting edge therapies like CAR T. So it's a new thing for me. This is my first year. I'm actually chair of the foundation of the board. So
I'm gonna manually add the applause.
Thank you.
It's tremendous. It's a huge commitment, Darshan.
It is. And that's my question. It's one of those things where we're part of this. We're trying to push that forward because it's so important. And as we do it, I do go, are we effectively Sisyphus, just pushing that giant boulder up the mountain only for it to keep rolling back? On the other hand, I don't even know if we're pushing that mountain, that boulder up. So you pointed out some things that came out, and you were like, here are some of the reasons. You pointed out to endpoint clarity, you talked about biomarkers, you talked about regulatory clarity, but that's not unique to patients. Why do you think that we simply haven't gotten the traction that we should? And what did 2025 offer that didn't work out?
You know, I think that industry certainly likes to throw around these terms like patient-centric, and now they throw around terms like site-centric. And I think just the fact that you see all of these getting thrown around is a reminder that while well-intentioned, we under-resource these different opportunities by spreading ourselves around so many. And so there are lots of boulders that we're pushing up lots of hills, but instead of applying our army against any one challenge, we apply two bodies against that challenge, right? And so we leave those people to keep pushing it up the hill and to try and fight the fight for diversity and representation and inclusion, or for improvement in access for patients to be able to participate, or to make it less burdensome for research staff at the study site to make the studies happen. We say the right words, we under-resource in all of these areas. I was visiting a biotech in Cambridge, a large biotech, a small pharma, mid-sized. Okay, it was a pretty big company in Cambridge. And
it was GSK.
It was Pfizer. And you know, I'm sitting with a colleague there, and we're talking about the things he's trying to make happen with artificial intelligence in their company, and digital measurements and digital endpoints, and just how hard it is. And on the video screen behind him is like the company announcement board, and a company announcement flashes up there that effective December 1st, our new TMF, our new trial master file goes into effect, our new platform. Make sure you've got your training and you're ready to go because it happens on December 1st. And I'm like, that is what change looks like. Change doesn't look like a guy sitting in the kitchen lamenting that he's kind of left on his own trying to advocate for digital measures or the use of AI that can bring more efficiency to the way we're working and operating. Change looks like the top down is making a commitment. They're putting resources in place. They're writing checks. They're supporting the change management around it. Maybe they're even hiring a consulting firm, but somebody's accountable and there's a date where we're switching from the old to the new. That's what change looks like. Nobody sits back in the C-suite and says, let's change our TMF and just waits to see if it magically happens or not. Or because that's kind of what we do with so many of these other things, including the concept of patient centricity. I think the other challenge there is it's hard to define what that really means. Is patient centricity an emotion? Is it like just an emotional attachment that I feel that I'm trying to do right by patients? Because it's hard to look at the way most of industry is executing their studies today, knowing that we could decentralize, we could add transportation support, we could add better reimbursement and compensation for patients, that there are so many things we could do that we don't do, that it's hard for me to say that we've realized patient centricity as compared with realizing the rhetoric.
I think what we're very good with is starting initiatives. And we're terrible with continuing them because it's just not sexy to continue doing something someone else started. Everyone wants to leave their mark. And the fact is that patient centricity is sexy, but it's so 2020. It's so 2022. And I think that's part of the problem, which is it looks really cool to go behind something and say, we support transportation for patients. We support reimbursement. But the point is that when you start off with patient centricity, it's too big. And if you make that your pitch, you'll never quite make you'll never quite draw that pathway you want, chart the course you want. So I guess the question then becomes, is it a simple question of making smaller goals and going, you know what, instead of saying patient centricity, let's focus on, as you did it, getting clarity for whether patients are, in your case, from the FMLA, do patients qualify for reimbursement or control under the and protection under the FMLA because of patient centricity, and that can be the eventual goal. But if we target each small portion at a time, you're going to make progress. People don't lose the will, and I wonder if that's a better way to move forward because people just can stand behind it. What's your take on that?
There are lots of small things we all could and should be doing every day. Anyone who is touching a study in some way, whether you're a CRA or a CRC, a study manager, a clinician, there are small things that you can do in your role to help make that happen, right? Those small steps make them a reality, right? Some of us might have seen on LinkedIn a person from a research center post about how a CRA told them you can't use e-consent in this study. Well, is that right? Like, as a CRA, are you sure about that information? Can you run that back in your organization? Can you be an advocate knowing that electronic informed consent, the evidence has shown us time and again through published research in the literature that patients are better informed and they retain that information for longer. And so, like, even as a CRA, how can you help to fight that fight internally to make sure that is that really the right information that I'm communicating to the site, or does it just kind of feel like I'm stonewalling them?
It's so interesting you pick on on e-consent because I attended a conference, and this is my problem with conferences. Everything said on the podium is stuff everyone's heard before. It's the stuff off the podium that I think is far more interesting. And an example of that is this e-consent conversation I had, where everyone was like, let's do e-consent. E-consent's going to be amazing. And then off the podium, I was like, so why do you think we're not doing e-consent? He's like, no one requires it. And if they do, there's no return on investment because no one said, I'm going to participate because of e-consent. So it's this nice to have that costs money but doesn't actually give me any returns. So why am I going to spend my energy and time on it? So in the same way, there is this discussion. For example, I'm calling out Donna Libretti, who is amazing. She's been pursuing this idea of, you know what, we want to make sure that if patients participate in clinical research, they get paid a little bit better. And if they get paid a little bit better, I think there are a couple of people out there, I think Donna is included, where she comes out and says, maybe that should be tax deductible and that you aren't paying an income tax on that. All of which are fair points to make. I guess my question is, in those scenarios, are these incentives that we know will fail, and therefore we can stand behind them and all feel good about putting it out there, instead of knowing that if I take on this topic and spend money and time and have a clear ROI, and I can try to build that support behind it, it's more likely to get somewhere, but then I have to stand behind it.
Well, look, I think getting clarity or even getting legislation around modification of the tax code around what is deductible there is not is a long road to have to go down. And so in some ways, you could say it's easy for folks to jump on because they know it's going to be a road that's so long that they're not going to be there to see it through. But on the other hand, these things are achievable. We know that there are pathways and processes to getting that type of policy in action, especially if you're a large, heavily resourced pharmaceutical company with headcount in Washington, D.C., and lobbying firms on speed dial. Like, there are ways that we could harness the superpower of this industry to try to make those changes for good.
So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about patient centricity. We've talked a little bit about reimbursement. Let me
I've got one
ask,
other reimbursement
please,
thorn in my side, Darshan,
please,
while we're on the topic.
please.
Um, uh, we've made this shift over the last decade that routine care procedures and trials should be billed through the patient's existing payers. We do
Great.
coverage analyses and coverage determinations, and we say this CAT scan, this CT, this MRI, these will be considered, routine
Standard
care
care.
procedures, standard of care on the schedule. Bill it to the patient's insurance. Sounds great on paper. The drawback, of course, is as a human in America, we never get 100% coverage when things go through our routine care pathways, right? So I have deductibles, I have copays, and then I deal with denials. And sometimes those denial rates are 10, 15% of the time, right? So when pharma used to cover all of the procedures in the schedule of events in a protocol in their study budget, those sites were covered 100% for those procedures. When we tell them you're going to do this coverage determination and these scans are going to get run through the patient's insurance company, now all of a sudden I'm paying bills while I'm in your study. And if there's a denial of coverage, who's eating that cost? Is it coming back to me, the study participant? Is the site eating the cost for the denied claim? Because they'll say they can't go back to the sponsor. They can't go back to the sponsor because it'll look like they're a secondary insurer for the patient picking up a denied claim. And nobody wants to trip over CMS and OIG and trigger an investigation. Interestingly, I've even heard large research institutions tell pharma, don't pay me for these procedures. Only let us run it through a coverage determination and have the patient's insurance cover it, just because we don't want to get tripped over on these things looking like we're double billing, even by accident. But all of those lead to the same pathway, which is financial toxicity for the person who's participating in your study, because they're getting left with bills that they didn't used to get left with. So even while our rhetoric of patient centricity is going up, we're shoving even more bills on the patient while they're in these trials.
Yeah. I think it's such a great. I'll be honest. I haven't had anyone raise that question to me before. I've heard about the Medicare secondary payer rule and the implications of it, but no one's talked about how do you tie that into deductibles. So it's interesting that you raise it. So thank you for doing that. Speaking about financial toxicity, let's pull this into the other piece you raised a few seconds ago, which was the movement away from patient centricity towards site centricity. My question for you is, first of all, is this a real movement, or is this just something that is happening at the site level? Because I'll be honest, I don't know too many sponsors in the small to medium size who are talking about it. Now, there's someone like, for example, Robert Salomon, who's very, very outspoken about it. I think that's awesome. But outside Rob, I don't know too many small sponsors going, yeah, you know what? We want to focus on you guys and not on us. And my experience talking to these sponsors is they're spending their time, their energy going, I just need to survive. And I don't have time to think about someone else's survival when I don't know if I'm going to survive. What is your take on that so far?
I think that's an astute observation. So I think that at a macro lens, if you go to certain conferences, go to Scope, go to DIA, it does feel like the lens has shifted from talking about patient experience, patient burden, patient centricity to site experience, site burden, site centricity. And it's hard for this industry to walk and chew gum. And so it's hard for me to imagine that we're putting the same amount of energy that we used to in one while also now taking consideration of the other. It is, though, a really important observation that you make that many small pharma and biotech, especially those focused in rare, will continue with that laser focus on the patient, the understanding of the patient journey, while the larger pharma that are concerned with a portfolio of studies, studies across an enterprise, are much more sensitive to the burden that they're placing on sites. Now, I have a little bit of beef with this, and I did even back in my days at Pfizer. And I remember at my days at Pfizer, we had this set of initiatives we were running, and patient experience and site experience and this and that and this and that. And at one point, they said, we're just going to merge together patient experience and site experience. And I was like, I don't know if I'm a big fan of this. It kind of feels like we're going to let one go and focus on the other. In a lot of ways, it was actually a really good idea to bring those efforts together, because it kind of feels a bit like before you put the oxygen mask on your loved one on a plane, you have to put it on yourself. You have to kind of make sure that you can breathe if you're going to take care of the person next to you. And that, I think, is one way of thinking about the importance of supporting sites and site experience in order that we can also improve patient journey and patient experience. I think some of my beef with all this is sometimes I feel like we're talking about sites with the same degree of urgency and empathy as we do with the patients, and kind of putting them on a level playing field. And I don't think that's right. And I'm going to just sort of say that it's not right, right? Patients aren't paid. Patients are there because they have to be there. Patients are there because they're seeking hope and seeking with urgency opportunities for an often devastating medical diagnosis. People working at a site made a career decision that they want to work in the clinical research industry. And while I'm not saying that they should be abused for that or be underpaid for that, there is a long stretch between making a career decision to work in a certain field and being a patient with a devastating diagnosis seeking a treatment option. I think the other thing that I have a bit of issue with is we talk about the site as if now we've personified a building. A site is a physical location, right? People work at a site. So the people are study coordinators and investigators. Their experiences are radically different. And we kind of bundle everything together and say, we're creating burden for the site. Well, I think the only way we create burden on a site is if I put a crane with a wrecking ball leaned up against it, right? But the humans inside of the site are very different. They have different roles and responsibilities, and what is burdensome to them really varies quite a bit. The other thing I'll call out is, what is a site, right? Because we're kind of lumping these all together. And if you follow like private equity investments, some of the sites out there seem to be doing very well these last few years. And so if they're doing financially so well that private equity is throwing money in a competitive way to roll these things together, then why is it that their staff are being treated in such an ineffective and poor way, right? So there's different types of sites out there. And so I think the generalization doesn't do justice. I think that we are dehumanizing the actual people, study coordinators and investigators. It's their experiences we should care about, not this amorphous building called a site, because, I'd like it to still stand, but I'm not as empathetic towards a building. And I think my last point here would be, to me, this all comes down to budgeting, right? If we're talking about burden, we all have burden with what we do. Are we resourcing the people doing these tasks appropriately to manage the burden that's being passed down? And so, are sites requesting the right budget? Are they getting the wrong budget back? Are they using the dollars that they are getting in ways that can support the proper resources to deliver the study? So I feel like there's a few misses here when we're talking about burden. Sometimes we can't remove burden. So we have to understand it, we have to empathize with it, and we have to resource it appropriately to get the job done.
You mentioned burden. It made me think about why 2025 was different. 2025 saw the rise of the Trump administration that said that we're going to rethink a lot of the stuff we're doing. Specifically, they pulled out that overhead, and well, they didn't pull it out as much as significantly lowered it. But for the larger sites, this was what allowed them to be operational. What do you think 2026 looks like as a result of these overheads being taken out? Because I'll give you my take on it. The overhead represented something accurate, which is these are actual costs borne by sites. What it also represented for these larger sites was a profit margin. The question is, at what point have you gone past a reasonable profit margin into usury, I forget how it's pronounced, profit margins? And that's what I would argue the Trump administration was targeting. So is 2025 the death of large sites and the rise of the smaller sites? And is 2026 going to see that happen?
It's an interesting hypothesis, right? The flip side is those academic sites, are they even more desperate and hungry and willing to compete harder for industry-sponsored research because of the lack of budget and support that they would need to get the work done from federally sponsored research? It does feel like in 2025 we've seen this pattern, not to get political on, reds versus blues, but we've seen this pattern of taking things down as institutions without necessarily investing in what's supposed to come next to make sure that we're addressing our goals here, right? And whether you say our goal is to have a competitive biopharmaceutical industry, whether it's to compete with China and win in America, whatever your goal may be there, I think most Americans believe that we should have infrastructure in this country to support medical research. I don't think that most Americans aspire to a future where they have to fly to China to receive medical breakthroughs, because we kind of dropped the ball for this decade. So I think that, this question to me is, with all of there's this notion to me of like creative destruction, and we focused on the destruction, and now we have to focus on the creative, right? There's pillars around how research has been funded and supported in this country that have been broken down, and now we have to figure out how to rebuild or reinvent. Does that mean it's going to be more private sector standalone research sites and research site networks that fill that gap? I'm not sure. Because so many of these patients, we've talked for years about research as a care option, and how do we more closely embed research within healthcare settings. I have great respect for peers that are running these big site networks, but if they're not integrating with how local care is being delivered, it seems that that's running the opposite direction from research as a care option, when our care delivery locations are no longer capable of supporting research within. So, I'm not really sure, Darshan. I certainly hope it's not the end of research embedded in care delivery spaces. I'm hopeful that those institutions are able to be increasingly competitive in working directly with industry. I think there's a lot that they have to win, because they have the patients, they have the electronic health records, they have access to millions of patients that they're already seeing in their doors every day. How can they do that work far more efficiently to help offset for some of the loss that they've faced with regards to some of the overhead from the federal government?
I'm going to use this opportunity to talk a little bit more about some of the changes because you actually triggered some of these thoughts. You talked about the importance of the competitive biopharma landscape and how we may have inadvertently or advertently pushed some of the research towards China, even though that may not have been the goal. Specifically, I think that and people generally argue and agree, at least from the U.S. perspective, that China's taken a lot of technology that exists in the U.S. And use it themselves, and now they have a incredibly competitive, if not advanced, and sort of challenging um, biotech and cell therapies division that's doing really, really well. But I think that the rise of that has also meant that the U.S. government is now playing defense. And what stuck out to me was this idea of we're not going to let data across the countries like it used to. So the DOJ for the first time put out its bulk data rule, which I've never seen before personally. Have you heard of this, Greg?
No, tell me about this.
Yeah, so the bulk data rule is basically we don't want patient data. Well, we don't want data for individuals to go across to it's like 7 countries, and one of them is China. And the concern is that they will use it, abuse it, having American patient data. And that affects things like pharmacovigilance. That affects things like clinical research. So the big thing we used to do in the industry is, you know what, we're going to do the research here, but really India and China will really bring in the bulk of the patients. Well, now I'm doing transactions with India and China. India kind of took a back seat because in 2014, 2015, they had major clinical trial problems, and India kind of fell behind. China is now competitive, so that's why they're being pushed away. But what happens to the studies here? And that's going to become a real concern. You take on the Biosecure Act. Have you heard of the Biosecure Act?
Yes.
Okay. You want to tell people what the general stuff around the Biosecure Act is?
I do not.
Fair enough. I love it. So the short version of the Biosecure Act, it didn't actually pass, but the first version of it was we want to, again, protect data. We don't want the data to go to China and, again, 7 or 8 other countries, with the idea that we're worried about this data just being shared. The question then becomes, are we landing up in a space where we're going to be isolated in the research world? Because we can't send data to Europe. We can't send data to China. There's no sense in sending data to India. Well, where are we actually operating? Are we going to work off of just 300 million patients and go, that's all we're going to work off of? Is that going to slow down drug research or a device research or the like? Or is there more to it, and I'm sort of missing the forest for the trees?
How I guess the corollary question though is, are we capable of supporting federated research models where we can run research that are coordinated globally, globally consistent, globally harmonized according to a shared protocol, but where our data infrastructure respects some of the local governance and local autonomy, right? So that we can run federated models that leave data resident in its local jurisdiction, but we are able to get out of that data the answers that we need around efficacy, safety, or other parameters of importance, and that the data has been acquired in ways that bring both confidence around integrity and consistency according to a protocol, so that this doesn't become a barrier. It just becomes the way that we're doing business, that we're not shuttling vast amounts of data from one country to another across potentially politically tenuous infrastructure, but instead we're taking advantage of different federated models.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to understand what you just said, because I was mostly caught up in the word federated models. I was like, that sounds very important, but I don't know what it means.
So when I think about like I'll give an example there. Like working in pharma, we love accessing people's health data, right?
Yeah,
We there's a lot of good things that happen from it, and a lot of good research questions that can be answered. At times, there are instances, for instance, where some institutions don't let their data outside of their four walls. They're
sure.
not looking to send their data off to companies like Pfizer. And so,
Right.
in different federated models, that data can stay where it is, and different types of analytics, queries, or other even more sophisticated things can happen on their side of the firewall. And what we're getting back are the answers, the results that we're looking for, the learnings, rather than the data itself. And can we run these types of federated models? So I'll give an example, actually. One very prominent company that was originally built as a federated model was Trinetics. Which was, at its time, really kind of at the forefront of letting sponsors run these kind of distributed queries. Where do patients exist that match my eligibility criteria that I'm drafting for a study? And rather than in the original Trinetics model, rather than try to centralize and grab data from all the institutions and drop it in a central repository, it was more of this distributed query that I could sort of ask the question and it would get pushed out to hundreds or maybe even thousands of sites. The query would get run locally and the answers would come back. And those types of federated models let data holders sort of maintain their sense of control and autonomy and jurisdiction and governance, but still let questions come that need to be answered.
I think the advantage of the federated model is the fact that in the end you can go query the actual data. I think the fact is that in when you are a regulator like the FDA or the Chinese version of the FDA, you need to be able to actually see the source data. Because how do you know that the decision you made, the determination you made is accurate? And there has been these charges levied against the Chinese determination that sometimes that data may not be as accurate um, as you'd want to. Daniel's pointing out you need a semi-permeable membrane.
But is that semi-permeable membrane necessitating a plane ticket for that regulator to have to fly off to China to permeate the membrane to be able to see firsthand and do their audits and build their own confidence that the data was properly captured? Or to Daniel's, sort of provocative theme there, can that membrane be permeated in or penetrated in remote ways that still respect the autonomy of the data holder and their own governance and rules? Without necessarily saying we're moving the data out, how can I kind of ship my eyes in? Now, Darshan, the other hook to the constraints, and I'll be curious from your audience whether if any here live have thoughts on it or if any are listening to a replay. Today the other hunger for data is to be able to train our models, our bio
Mm,
models, which are living at this next generation, whether whether it's around the process of clinical trials or just for discovery and research purposes, and to what extent you can train models in a federated way. To what extent can I leave my data in that country, in that local environment, but kind of ship an instance over that can learn and train from it and then leave that data intact and otherwise unfettered? I'm not sure how well that works, and I'll be curious. Maybe that's something that the OpenAI or Anthropic people have already been publishing or writing on, or maybe some entrepreneur is already cooking up.
here's my question. My question is, you're in in a federated model. The fact is the data resides on local servers or controlled servers, if you will. Um, I am not convinced that you can actually train on that data because the truth is you don't have the informed consent to do that. Whether you're talking on GDPR, you're talking on CCPA, the fact is that these patients did not concede, did not agree that you can use their data in these ways. So, while I think that it could lead to some great places, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I would argue that if you want to use the data, I think go ahead. But if you're going to use that data and you're going to go ahead, get the consent of the patients first. This idea of us saying ooh, can we sort of just ignore what happened in the past and just move forward now because we have a new tool, a new toy that we want to use now? I don't think that that's how you have to work it. You have to go back and get the consent, or the FDA needs to come up with a new mechanism where such consent is obtained. And I'm not even convinced it's the FDA. This might have to be a federal, multi-agency. You know what? We're going to throw up an ad and say, if you've given this data, you have consented implicitly. If you want to opt out, we will agree to that. But with this idea of we're not going to get that federal mandate, and we're still just going to do it because we can. Well, that's what happened with. And Craig, I know you missed my talk at ACRP last month, but that's exactly what I pulled up. Claude, I think, landed up paying 1.5 billion, is my recollection, and then New York Times and OpenAI settled. So we have this dichotomy of how separately owned data was being used. In the case of OpenAI, I believe they came out and said that it's fair use. In the case of Claude, they said not so much. And now today's or yesterday's news was OpenAI may settle with authors, in which case maybe it wasn't as clean as they thought it would be. So if we know that this data is problematic, if we know that whether copyrights or something else controls this data, in those scenarios, is it appropriate that we sort of ignore these patient rules when we've been talking about patient centricity? And that brings us a whole circle back. Like, we circle back to the same question: is how patient centric is it to go, let's ignore that? So what do you think?
I think that the divergence of data science and patient centricity has been happening for a number of years, and this era with AI is only further exacerbating this. We, in some ways, this is like Henrietta Lacks 2.1.
Very much so.
Because Henrietta Lacks 2.0, I'm sure your audience knows the story of Henrietta Lacks, patient, African-American woman, I think it was cervical cancer, down at Hopkins in Baltimore. After she passed from that disease, her cell line, which are now affectionately known as the HeLa cell lines, were grown and regrown and regrown and regrown, and have been used to and traded with research centers around the world to support research and cures in dozens and dozens of therapeutic areas. And all of this was done without the awareness or consent of Henrietta Lacks or of her family, whose genetic material is part of this narrative. Right. And so you can say a lot of good has been done, and indications as far reaching as AIDS research, as well as other cancers. Right. But all without the permission or consent. It's kind of funny that we, even today are calling these HeLa cells, doing some sort of quirky acknowledgement to Henrietta Lacks, HeLa, whose initials were on the vials, but never had her consent. And, to me, in the story of data science and real world data, we've been kind of revisiting our failures of the past and how we've been using people's data for a number of years. We have a vast multi-billion-dollar industry that is buying and selling people's medical records data, and have been doing so for a number of years, feeling that it's safe because I have removed certain identifying information, most of which we knew even before the age of ChatGPT could be recreated and could be used to re-identify, which can only be done even easier in today's era of, omni-available AI tools. And so, if that was a problem yesterday, and we kind of let it slide, well, now, to your point, everybody wants even more of this data to train their models. And you could say, well, I can use AI today, Darshan, and create synthetic data sets. I could, but even that it's kind of like you're describing with OpenAI. It's still being derived from a source, and that source in one case was an author or creator, and the other case the creator was a patient, and we're not acknowledging and respecting the source. And so is the future one where we try to do this massive opt-out and flip the script from opting in into opting out of research, that everybody is a participant unless you've marked your driver's license that you're not a data donor, instead of having to mark that I am a donor on my driver's license? Or are we going to see more platforms that give patients explicit permission to be data connectors and data sharers? And in doing so, is this actually like a part of our future narrative around universal basic income and strategies to ensure, economic salvation for people in the age of AI? Because so much of it might come back to my data, and my data has value, and how can I participate in the monetization of my data with full transparency when my data has value? Others are participating, but I'm kind of locked out of it.
We have a comment. I really did think we're going to try to wind up soon, but this might be the last comment we kind of address. I think the cells, materials, genetics cells is more consent bound than signals that would have been passed unnoticed when the sensors and capture for treatment diagnosis. I don't fully understand what the person's saying. What do you think they're saying, and can you respond?
I'm wondering if they're trying to make the distinction here between cellular material like HeLa cells and one's data.
Okay.
Although I can't say I'm sure here. And maybe there should be a difference, but I'm not sure that there should, right? I mean, you could say that my cellular material is a physical construct, and there's only one instance of it. But in the case of immortal cell lines like HeLa cells, it's almost as replicable as copying and pasting my medical record data is. So I'm not sure if that was the theme of the question, but for me, I kind of put them together, and consent around how my data is being used, whether it's histologic and cellular, or whether it's digital and health data, I think should run through the same channels, and those channels should start and end with me. I have access through credit reporting agencies to be able to see what data is held about me, to see who else has touched that data about me, and to be able to lock that data if I don't want it to be shared, so that if other entities want to see it, they have to come to me to unlock it. And in that model, I can use that data for good. Like, I'd like to be able to apply for a new credit card, and I can prevent it being used in ways that I don't support. We know we can deploy models like that at nationwide scale for all financial transactions that are happening for every human in this country. Why can't we envision doing the same with our data?
I have so much to comment on. I'm just going to stop right here because we could literally keep going. This is absolutely fascinating. Craig, before we go, if people want to reach you, how can they reach you?
It's that's the beauty of social, right? Find me on LinkedIn. What I love on LinkedIn is every college kid or graduate student who's doing a research study that involves clinical trials seems to be able to find me and reach out directly and schedule a call. And so if you're working in this field and you have an idea you'd like to share or bounce around, do the same. Make like those college kids. Don't be shy.
And you can find me at darshan@kulkarnilawfirm.com. Craig, thank you so much for coming on. This was incredible. I hope we can do more of these because obviously people are interested.
Hey, I'm glad you got your StreamYard back, Darshan. Let's keep it going.
For sure. Thanks again.